Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be demonstrating a couple of new features available to deal with linked tables in your Simple GIS Client version 11.1 software. So the new features I'm going to be demonstrating today allow you to link external tables to your feature layers through your custom data form in your Simple GIS Client applications. So for example, in this case, I have a shapefile loaded called land tracks. It's just a simple polygon shapefile and it represents tracts of land. So in this first example, I have an external table that I'm going to link to this shapefile. And this external table represents property owners for different tracts of land. And these external tables that you link to your feature layers can have multiple records that would link to a single feature in your layer. So to begin with, in this particular example, I'm going to go to my layer, my table of contents, and as I double click on my layer and the table of contents, I bring up the layer properties dialog box. And of course from here I'm going to go down to the lower left corner on the first tab, and I look for this custom form editor button. And this will actually launch the form designer. And in this case, I can see that I've already began creating a form for my attribute data for this feature layer. And in this case, I've added several different controls onto this form. And so this is covered in one of our previous tutorials as far as how you design your form. And I can add all these different types of controls on my form and tie this to key attribute data in my feature layer. And in this case, I'm going to go over here to my toolbox because I'm going to add one more control feature. So I'm looking in my toolbox here and I have all these different options. But the feature I'm going to add now is called a linked table. And I simply click on this button and then I click on the location on the form where I want to place this table. And when I do, I get a new dialog box that comes up that asks me to select the table source for my data. So in this case, I'm just needing to select the external table that contains the data I'm linking into this shapefile. And I have these different tabs to represent different types of data I can link. So if I had, for instance, an ODBC compliant table that I've created an ODBC connection, I could use the ADO table tab. Likewise, if I had a table served from a Simple GIS server application, I would click on this tab to select that table. Or if I have a file-based table like I do here, I can simply come and click on this open folder and then select the file table that I'm wanting to link to. And this could be a DBase table, for instance. It could be an Excel file or a CSV file. So I select my table and I click apply on my table source. And when I do, I see that it adds this new control to my form. And in addition, I see under the linked table the database, and in this case all I see for the database name is a backward slash, and that's because it recognized that this table is contained in the root of my shapefile, so it added it as a relative path. I can also specify whether I want this table to be read-only, and also I can specify whether I want it to delete related records when I delete features out of my shapefile. So if you uncheck the read-only and you check this deleted related records, what this would do is as you delete features out of your shapefile, it would delete any related records associated with that feature from your linked table. In addition, I have a set of fields here that allows me to define the relationship between my feature and my table. So the first one just lists all the available features in my layer. And the field that's going to define my relationship is called this track ID. And in my table that I'm linking to, it also has an ID field. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying that this is the field that contains the common key that would tie these features together. And then I can also order the records in my table by field if I choose to do so, just by selecting from the sort table records by. And now I'm just going to expand my table control by clicking on one of the black handles and dragging. And as I'm finished now with that form design, I'll click apply. And then once again, I'll click Apply under my layer properties. And so now if I use the View Feature Data tool, and my land tracks is my active layer, as I click on this feature, I now see that here's all of the attribute data associated with that feature, and then here are all the related records out of that table that I linked to. So I see I have 3 different landowners in this case, and I see their ownership percentage, which I had selected to sort the records by. So it sorts that in ascending order. And so now I see that I have all of this information available in this custom data form that I built with no coding at all. So again, this is purely a visual form designer. And so now I have one other example I'll cover here for you, and that is a way to graph data from a linked table, adding it to a chart on your attribute data form. And a good example of this might be if you had historical information that you wanted to graph. And so in this example, I have an electric system that I've modeled, and I'll just zoom to this electrical system. And one of the components of this is a meter component. And so this meter is represented by this star point shape at this location. And it's basically just a point shape file called meters. And this represents physical meters installed in the field. And so this has obviously associated attribute data with this meter, but I also have a customer that is associated to this meter. And so for this example, I'm going to assume if I have a table, let's say, of historical usage information for this electrical meter related to a customer, I could display that information in my attribute form. So again, I'll double click on my shapefile to bring up the layer properties, and I'm going to go to my custom form editor, and I see that I already have, again, kind of like before, I've started a attribute data form, and I've added the actual attribute fields for the different data that I'm collecting for my meter attributes. And so I have a radio button, and actually I left the caption off of this, but this is supposed to represent the phase of the meter, whether this is a single phase electrical meter or a 3-phase. Then I have a combo box for the voltage of the meter, and then I also have a meter ID attribute. And in this blank area of the form here is where I'm going to place my chart object. And again, like I said, I'm going to graph historical usage information. And the way I would do that, I would come to my toolbox and I would select the chart object, and again click on the location on the form where I want to place the object. And of course I get all of these different properties I can set for my chart. And obviously right now by default the available fields that I could graph are just any numerical data fields in my shapefile. And in this case I have a feature ID field and I have a phase field that's numerical. But that's not really the data that I want to graph in this chart. Like I said, I want to link, and I'm going to link to an external table. So I'm going to select this checkbox that says Graph Linked Table. And as I click in this checkbox, I get my table source dialog box that appears. And again, I have the tabs along the top that allows me to select the type of table that I'm wanting to link to. Data table represents a file-based table. ADO table for ODBC compliant, or a Simple GIS server table. And in this example, the actual table that I'm going to link to is an ODBC compliant database table. And so I'm going to select this ADO table tab. And what I need to do now is click on this button here with the little ellipses on the button. And this is going to bring up my data link properties. And so what I'm going to do is I need to select the OLEDB provider, which in this case is the default Microsoft OLEDB provider for ODBC data sources. And then on the connection tab of this data link properties, I'm going to select the ODBC connection that I'm going to connect to. So I've already created an ODBC connection on my Windows instance, in this case called Customer Meter Data. And this is a 32-bit ODBC connection, so that's important. Since Simple GIS Client is a 32-bit application, any ODBC data sources you define should be defined in the ODBC 32-bit connection. So once I select my ODBC data source, now I need to go and select the catalog or the database that I want to use in this case, which is just a Microsoft Access database in this example. And so I just select that database and I click OK at this point. Now that I've clicked OK, I go to my table name drop-down list and I select the table that I'm wanting to connect to and click Apply. Now I see that it filled in my DB and my table information at the bottom of this grouping. And then I also see the available fields or any numerical fields contained in that table, which the only numerical field I had was a field called usage. And it only lists numerical fields because logically that's the only fields that you could graph or add into a chart object. So now I need to define the link between the table and my attributes in my shapefile. And so I do that by, if I notice up here I have an attribute called meter ID. And so I also have a meter ID in my table that I'm linking to. And so that is the fields that I'm going to choose to link related records between this external table and the meters in my shapefile. And so what this is going to do is select any records in the external table that I'm linking that has the matching meter ID to the feature in the shapefile. And then I'm also going to order the records in my table by, there is a date field actually in this table called reported date. And now under my available fields, I select the usage field and I click on the button with the double arrows pointing to the right to add that as a series that I want to include in my bar chart. I could change the label for this series if I so chose, although since I only have a single series in this chart, it's really not going to make a difference. The label won't be used. So in this case, I'm also going to go ahead and resize my graph here to make it occupy the full space of the form. So I'm just going to click in the handle and drag. And then I'm just going to click and move to reposition the chart on my form. And then I may just add a label here underneath the chart. So I selected a label control and just clicked on the chart. on the form. I want to add the label and I'm going to change its caption here. I'm just going to call this historical usage. And I'll put it in kilowatt hours. And then I'm going to go ahead and make the label bold and make its size a little bigger to stand out. And now just click and resize it just right directly underneath my chart, kind of in the center. So now I'll click apply. Once I'm done with my form design, click apply again on my layer properties. And now if I use the view feature data tool with meters my active layer and click on my meter point feature, I see that lo and behold, I now have a form that has my meter attribute data, plus it is displaying the historical usage data from the external table that I just linked based upon that meter ID. So again, anytime I have an external table that has records that can be linked to a unique feature in my shapefile or vector layer, I could use this control to graph those records on my attribute data form. Another example might be, for instance, if I had well locations in a shapefile and I had historical environmental sampling data in an external table, I could relate that data to my well locations in my shapefile and display that information on my attribute data form. So hopefully you see some applications here. And again, for more information, please visit our website at www.simplegissoftware.com. Thank you.